All right guys, welcome. On a previous video I did what is a glue up, and I just went through the process of what actual gluing up looks like step by step, and then what you can get out of some of those glue ups, some of that pretty nice looking planks. We had started with basically some rough pallet wood like we've got here. So in that video with this one, I posted for people to leave a comment of what they thought I should make with it, as I had just used it as a example, but I never let anything go to waste. And from that, somebody commented to make a set of shelves out of it, so I decided to run with that, and I'm actually going to do a 3-tiered shelf. And that top comment cam from Carol Dalloretta 749. I hope I said that right, but thank you for your participation and the idea of building this out. Hopefully it turns out pretty good. Here's my other 2 panels that I've glued up to match. These are just face glue ups. As you can see here, I cut them down to the dimension that I came up with. Probably end up with maybe an inch, inch and a half for those planks after I find the center of each. As you can see, you got to leave enough room to allow yourself to find the center from top to bottom. That way, if you guys get any type of shifting from those planks, you have plenty of room to recover from that. With this glue up here that I have not unbuckled, I'll have less shift out. So that one could have been wider, but I am going to plane them all to match. So whatever my thinnest board ends up being, I'm going to plane the other ones to match as well. And then I have this to work with that'll end up planing down and chopping into some dimensions to be the legs for the shelves. So guys, I didn't go through the entire process of cutting them down, gluing them up and all that. You can watch my other video for that. But otherwise, we're just going to get right into planing these down and then building out a shelf. So first up, I'm gonna trim these down to match the diameter of that shelf. First, I'm gonna take one side off just to make sure I've got a true side. I'm gonna use the level trick as I don't have a joiner, but I'm gonna make sure I got a square side there, and then I'm gonna flip that over, and then I'll take it down to the actual 12-inch diameter that I have on that shelf, and then I'll be able to put it through the planer. At which point, once I have all 3, I'll decide on the final length that they're gonna come down to, figure out where some of the shift out leaves me a full length that matches all 3. All right, now that we got those cut down, we're gonna run them through the planer. So now we have the 3 shelves. Now I just need to figure out what diameter they can all reach. As you can see, we've got irregular ends. Some of them are a little worse than others, like this last one here. So ultimately, I need to find the even point. So clearly I need to come all the way back into this one here and then here. But something I want to consider first is how I'm going to be attaching the legs. I plan to notch out the diameter of the legs, and they are going to set into the boards. So that could be done on a corner, or that could be done a little ways inside, giving it kind of a lip on the face. So I'm going to put a little bit of thought to that, how I want to put that together, because that will also affect how much maybe I need to cut off. Because if it's going to be on the corner, then I don't necessarily need to make this whole edge here look the same. So I'll put a little thought to that, figure out how I want to do it, and then we'll make those cuts. Another thing to consider is how the wood finishes up. Since this is recycled pallet wood, some of them are a little more rough, but it adds character. I love the way some grains can turn out from pitting and whatever else, but specifically we do have some pitting on these boards. So if you could see on this one here, all of these dots in this piece there are actual holes. So I'll probably use some CA glue to fill some of that in, but you don't necessarily need to do that either. You can just clear gloss it, let it settle in, clear gloss it again, and probably be okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, kind of a rustic look. So that's more how you want to finish it. I will probably just spray it. As you can see on this one, I got a big knot there that you could fill in with epoxy or wood filler, which again, I don't like wood filler. I don't think it comes out all that great necessarily. I would just go ahead and put epoxy if you're worried about it being flat, and it just adds character to the fact that you can see through it. I think that looks good. Right here, I've got another one in which I will probably need to chisel this out a little bit because I can actually see some of the wood glue that's right here. So I'll clean that part out, and then I've got another really big one there. But otherwise, I'm just gonna spray over this. And this side here will probably be the side that faces down, and then I only have this one up here. So once you get to this point, you just kind of figure out which side is your best, which side you want to face up or down, and then go from there. Otherwise, if you can see that, looking pretty good for the start. So I've come to the decision on the leg. I have decided that I've got enough material here that I can cut this down into the 4 legs that I need for the shelf. And I'm gonna end up setting these into 3 shelves as well, matching each way. Whether those are on the sides or on the fronts, I haven't quite decided yet. What I've come up with here is I'm gonna go ahead and split these down the middle on both sides where they're gonna be mirrored in dimension, and then I'm gonna use those for the 4 legs. Clearly, I still gotta cut them square at the top and the bottom, but otherwise I will do that when I cut the shelves to their final dimension as well. I'm gonna use the miter saw for that. But while I've got the table saw set up here, I'm gonna go ahead and strip these down. First, I'm gonna cut the middle here on this part, and then I will cut the middle here. Once this is thinner, then I'll be able to get through. Clearly with the table saw, not being able to go all the way to the height of this, but once I cut it in half, I'll be able to get each piece down to that. So first I gotta find the middle. I'm just gonna grab my square over here, and then I'll double check it with the tape measure. As long as you have straight edges that you know that these are straight to each other, squared to the project itself. Since I've planed and cut this stuff all down to matching dimensions, I know that I'm good there. You take the square and you put the point up to the end of the project there. You make a line, and then you do the same on the opposite side there. That bisecting point right there is going to be the middle of that, and then you can just mirror that up to the tip there, and then I'll go ahead and do that across this other side as well. So you can take the square, again putting the top of the triangle up to the end of the project here. You draw a straight line across, diagonally across that is, and then you repeat it on the other side, and then this bisecting point here is supposed to be the middle. If you had a square end here that you knew was true to the rest of the project, you could also just use this square to find this line. This is not squared on my project, so I cannot do that. So another thing to take into account when you're making a cut like this and you're attempting to use this piece to make 2 dimensions, 2 separate pieces that you want to have mirrored sizes to, you want to cut directly on this line going down the middle. Splitting the difference here, I'm looking for 2 11/16 in, but then I've got to center this point here because this blade, the teeth on this blade is about 1/16 of an inch. So not quite 2/16, but just a little over 1/16. And so that's an amount that if I were to cut on the opposite side of this line, I'd lose that on the other side, and then they're not going to mirror up. And if you make any cuts like that and you find that they don't quite line up, you can totally just readjust your measurements by that 1/16 of an inch, finding where they will line up and just take that excess off. I've had to do that several times. Might happen this time, but you attempt to get it as close as you can. Another thing to consider when you're making these measurements, if you pull on a tape measure out, there's a little bit of a give, and then if you press, it gives a little bit that way. That can be about a 1/16 of an inch right there. So you want to account for that. As I've been measuring and pulling on it like so, I'm about to go the opposite way and press. So you want to make sure you account for that difference. You also want to make sure you're using the same tape measure, because if any of those things are slightly off or anything, you want to make sure that you're using the exact same measuring device for every single thing. An option to forgo the hook there is you can measure in from a full inch and use that. But otherwise, you could also just account for it. You can use your finger or use the outside of the blade there, just to make sure that you're accounting for that dimension. Again, a little bit of flex right there that you want to account for when you're doing any type of woodworking. You know, somewhere out in the field might not necessarily make as big a difference, doing a lot of outside measurements anyways, but something like this, you want to get it as close as 1/16 of an inch could make a big difference on a project like this. So you do want to make sure you take account for it. Also, you could use a type of measuring device that doesn't have that. You could use just a square or any other type of ruler, small T or something, but this is what I'm using, and I don't expect it to be necessarily perfect. I will make those adjustments on the flip side of it, especially considering the fact that I'm not going off of any specific measurements. I'm making this project up entirely as I go. I did not draw any plans or anything. I am strictly letting the wood create itself. Basically, whatever came out of the dimensions that were available to me, that's going to be the dimensions of this shelf. I regularly do projects that way, and if I'm going to attempt to repeat a project at that point, then I'm going to make some dimensions to follow and get it as close as I can. Never going to be perfect, but only you're going to know that, so you don't necessarily need to point that out to anybody. Just like any other imperfections in a project you make, you're probably the only one that's going to see it. So don't let perfect get in the way of something that's great. All right, so something else that's not necessarily part of the plan, but something I've got to account for. So as you can see, where I just made this cut is actually right where I had two pieces glued up, and I'm going to have to account for that on the finished project. So this is going to adjust my dimensions already because I'm going to want to make that go away. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and cut these down to in half. Make sure that I don't have any other issues before making those dimension changes, and then I'll make the same dimension changes on all of them. I could possibly do that with the table saw, of course, or I could do it with the planer, but I'll probably do it with the table saw since I've already got it out here. All right, guys, and as I mentioned, sometimes it doesn't work out perfect. I am slightly off on these. So I'm going to go ahead and match them all down to that smallest side, be done with that, and then we'll see about dimensioning the other side to match as well, and make sure that any imperfections are out at that point. All right, so now I'm just going to take and make minor adjustments to each one until I like how each one turned out. Again, this is pallet wood, so I just want to make sure that the faces of each side of these are looking good. Again, I've got that paper side that I showed you here where kind of got some peeling from where the joint was with the glue. But I'm just going to take those, I'm going to run those off first, but I'm just going to make very minor tweaks, and I am going to be running every single piece through, so that way I'm keeping them all to the exact same dimension as I take those little bits down. right onto the miter saw to chop everything down to the dimensions that I'm going to be using. My miter saw has not yet found a home to live in permanently. Just kind of gets moved around and tossed on top of whatever I'm currently working on. So it's right on top of the table saw at this point. And for suction, I don't even have a good way to connect it. So I've got an old rag, old t-shirt, that's actually wrapped up in here to cut off some of that space, and a couple bungees to help keep that attached. Maybe not the safest thing to do, so don't do that at home. But otherwise, again, working with what I got until I make some of those future investments with other connecting pieces and maybe a miter station home. This is what I've got, and this is what I'm working with. So first step is I'm going to go ahead and cut each one of these boards down just to get the first edge there, and then I'll find the length that I can meet with all of them from that point and go from there. Normally you can cut more than one piece at a time. With this, I'm going to do one at a time just to make sure that I'm getting as much material at the end that I possibly could and not just trying to make everything press together. And if you guys have the ability to get it or to make the adjustments, if you get a zero clearance guard here and on the back here, you can prevent a lot of this chip out that I get from mine. Again, with same thing with my table saw, this blade that's on here is the same one that came with it, so more meant to do construction grade cuts, not necessarily the nicest blade. That's another thing that would make a difference. So if you're seeing some of those split outs there, that's what that is. But I'll be able to clean that all up with sanding and such, which I plan to do anyways. And I'm not expecting this to exactly look perfect. It's more of a rustic thing that I'm going for anyways. Now I'm going to line them all up to find the shortest piece, and then they are all going to get cut to that dimension. All right, so here, just so I can make it a little quicker for myself, I'm going to go ahead and clamp these up to each other. That way I can move them around, and then I'll be able to see for sure what is the smallest depth for all of them. So it's roughly as close as this one is here. So I'm going to start right at that one, and then we'll make adjustments from there. All right, and using a square, I'm just going to transcribe this line all the way around the project, as I'm going to be cutting this on the shorter height, like so. Again, just another call out. Make sure you're accounting for the teeth of the blade itself before you make the cuts, that you understand that you're cutting on the outside of the line or inside or splitting it, whatever dimensions you're trying to get. For me on this cut, I'm cutting on the outside of the line to ensure that I'm taking off as little material as I can, just to make sure I have more to work with. Perfect side there, and of course the perfect side that we started with. And then it's a matter of figuring out what's the dimensions that I ended up with. So right here I've got just under 35 inches. I've got 34 and 15/16 actually. So with that, just shy of 35 inches, if I were to put some sort of those adjustable feet on the bottom of this afterwards, it'll get right up to that 36-inch mark, which is a pretty common dimension for furniture and other things, of course, being that 3-foot mark. So that's probably what I'll do. I'll just leave that alone and use those adjustable feet to get that additional height there. You could also make some sort of a base to put under each leg or anything like that. But another nice thing about those adjustable feet, when you're putting some of this furniture together, depending on the wood, sometimes it's pretty tough to get it flat. I mean, where you're sanding down a leg and the dimensions no longer make sense. Also, if it's on an uneven surface in your house, those twisting feet that you can just move up or down really help with that as well. So that is how those 4 pieces turned out. So certainly some cleanup left to do. I will be sanding everything, of course. I've got some blade marks and whatnot, but I'll be sanding it before I spray it with anything. I also have some spots. Some of these bigger holes I'm not too concerned with, but something like this, where the glue didn't necessarily press together there. I'll probably fill that in with CA glue. It'll give it kind of a darker grain look, and it'll tie all together. Same thing up here, if you can see that. Again, get some CA glue in there. That one you can actually see through a little bit, so I gotta do it on both sides. But once you spray this with a polyurethane, it'll really bring it all together anyways, and you're not gonna see that kind of stuff. And again, rustic is what I'm going for here. This isn't any type of perfect thing. Can't state it enough. It started as pallets, and yet it's gonna turn out looking pretty fantastic. And the same thing here, I've got all these uneven edges here from the slip out or different size boards that I was using. I gotta take the smallest dip, and that being right here. With my miter saw, I have enough play to be able to get out here and come back in. So I'm gonna take it down to this side, and I'm gonna do that with each of the 3 shelves. I'm gonna put them all together, butted up on one side, and then I'm gonna find that shallowest point and go ahead and cut them down just like I did with the legs. Now I've got the 3 shelves stacked up. I put the shortest one is on top, and then I've lined it up with the shortest edge here, and I'm going to take them all down. These bottom 2 are going to lose maybe an extra inch that could have been utilized, but again, I need to line them up all the same for the style of shelf I'm making. Could have totally done some sort of a tiered step down thing and used the excess, but definitely not the look I'm going for in this. I've got those 3 shelves cut down to a matching size. I've got the legs cut down to a matching size as well. I did not want to take this pattern to the front of the shelf. I was gonna have it follow the pattern that's already here. That's why I'm gonna put them on the side. And then I am gonna leave a little bit of excess at the bottom in order to kind of create some legs, and then there'll be a shelf in the middle and then the shelf at the top. They could either be completely squared up to the corners, or they could be offset into the middle a little bit. And so my plan is to notch these actually into the shelves. I don't want to attach money outside, that's just kind of cheap. So I plan to end up notching them out to line up with the shelves and then set them into place. Another option is I could notch out a little less on the shelves and just a little bit on part of this, leaving like a lip that they could sit on for reinforcements, but I could also just do some pocket screws. That's probably where I'm gonna land, is doing some pocket screws. We'll see how I get to that point. One of the issues that I already know that I'm gonna have is how to actually notch these out. There's a bunch of different ways you guys could do it. Certainly a chisel, which I have, and I'm not gonna do that, but I do have a Dado that I could cut these. You just measure them, line them out, and I believe that's the path I'm gonna take, but I actually don't have a crosscut sled that will allow me to cut these safely that way. In order to cut them, in order to notch out what I'm talking about, I would have to notch out here and here. And in order to make those cuts, the board would need to be able to go across the top of the table saw like that, standing up. Totally unsafe unless you got some sort of a crosscut sled that you can attach this to, where you're not really messing with the wood, but you're pushing the sled as a whole. Another option you could do is just taking like a handheld circular saw, setting the exact depth that you don't want to go past, and you could pin this board up on an edge or something like that, and you could totally just take several passes in between your marked lines, and then you can go and knock those out, any of that left behind material, and then use a chisel to clean it up. You can certainly use a jigsaw. I don't necessarily like that that's kind of freehand in order to make that cut work. A router could also be used to make that style of cut. So I am going to take a look around the shop, and that is probably what I'm gonna do, is go ahead and put a crosscut sled together specifically to finish this project. All right, so I've got my crosscut sled out here. I've got a Dado blade set up. It's just gonna make those grooves come out a little more square and quicker. I will have to adjust this piece. I've got my block set up here at 2 inches. That's how far off the ground I'll be coming for that first cut. I will have to adjust up to get to that full space that I need for the shelves. What I've done is I've gone ahead and pre-marked everything. So I've got all 3 shelves marked out. I've got one right in the middle of the 2, so one's going to be directly at the top, one's 2 inches from the ground, and one's right in the middle. And I've gone ahead and just squared everything up to each other. I'm going to cut them all at once using my clamps. So everything, when I slide, that'll be 1 pass for each piece, readjust, and I'll be able to knock them all out like that without worrying about anything coming on square. They'll all be perfect to each other, mirrored to each other. So if I have any human error, that won't transpose from one to the other. They're all going to be identical. So if I'm slightly off, it's not really going to matter because they're all mirrored to each other. I'm going to knock these out, and then I'm going to move on to the shelves themselves. I've got it clamped up for a 1/2 inch in. I am going to make all of the outside cuts on all of the boards, adjust the block, and then make all the same cuts again on all of them, just flipping the project around to make those line up. So we're on to the next stage, which is sanding. It was inevitable. Everything's got to be sanding. That's probably where we spend most of our time. But I'm all set up for that. Nothing special here. I've just got my Dewalt palm sander. I've got it rigged up with my shop vac. As you can see here, super fancy with my connector there. At some point, maybe I'll get that rockler set, but kind of committed to no more tools until I start turning some profit out of this. But making do with what I got. I've also got 100 grit. And then a 220 grit is what I'm gonna step to. I'm not gonna go past that. Let me know what you think as far as how high you thought I should have gone. I don't know what type of species wood each one of these are. Again, it was pallet wood that I glued up. So depending on hardwood, softwood, you get a different result as far as getting that grain to pop with all the sanding. I've taken my bar when I did that. I took that to a pretty high grit, and I don't know that I necessarily saw the pop. It certainly looked nice when I did it, but I don't know how much of a difference it made. But it does look really good. For this, I am gonna be spraying a polyurethane on it. I think 220 is gonna be just perfect. Also, I've got safety gear, glasses of course, and most importantly, I've got my respirator. I'm gonna have a lot of dust up here. I do have my shop vac going, like I said. It does do a pretty good job of controlling most of that, but there's still a lot of particulates up in the air. I don't have any type of good dust collection to clean out that air, any air filtration or anything like that. That's on my list to maybe create something for that, but just always wear your mask. It's definitely the best line of defense right there. I did go ahead and dry fit all this stuff together before taking it apart to be sanded. All the legs, there's nothing special there. They just got to be sanded, and they can be on any point. But with the shelves themselves, I did pick out which tier I wanted those to be on. Specifically, the top one I picked to be a very specific one, which I'll show later, but it had a lot of pinholing to it, and I thought it just looks really cool as far as some of that natural wood damage that it has in the grain and such, and I think it's going to turn out really good, especially when it's sprayed. And I just wrote that on the side of each shelf, so I'll sand that spot at the end after I get everything reassembled, but otherwise I'm going to sand the tops and everything else down. Once I put it back together, I'm gonna have to sand up some of it too. There'll be a little bit of, hopefully not too much, but always some banging and stuff when you get stuff together. Hopefully not, but you always got to work some of that out with some additional sanding as well. So even when I get it put together, I'll still be doing some more sanding before spraying it. So let's get into it. So I'm going into the 220 grit now. This is just going to be the final grit that I'm going into. I put down basically an old yoga mat. You can typically find some of those at Goodwill and things like that, but this will help when I'm moving around. It doesn't get all banged up and such, as this is going to be the final finish that I want. I'll kind of be working with this as I'm putting it together as well, but I'm just going to sand it on this and blow it off as I need to make sure that sand gets out of there. Otherwise, I'm just going to get through the rest of my sanding and then we'll get to putting it together. So the sanding's done. Now we're moving on to putting everything together. What I've got out here is I've got my Kreg jig. I'm going to do pocket holes. You could certainly do any other form of attachment as well. You could do dowels or some sort of biscuits if you got a biscuit joiner. I don't. I could make some drill holes with dowels and such to make it connect that way. This is the bottom side of the middle shelf that I've got here. I'm going to drill pocket holes into the underside here, so you're not going to see them. They're going to come through these spaces that we've cut out here and then into the legs themselves. So got everything set out here. I pre-measured everything to figure out what was going to work the best. I've decided that the 1 inch is going to work the best, and I've set up the spacing on my Kreg 320 here. Super simple one. If you don't have one yet, super simple to start out with. They're like 30 bucks. Or cheaper if you can find them on coupon or on discount. But otherwise, I've already done some test holes to find what was going to work best for me. Certainly it has preset settings and screws that you can use. That's typical with, you know, finding the actual depth of the board using the gauge that it comes with. I typically find what's going to work best for me. I want to make sure it's going to grab enough material, not have to be super far away, drilling a whole way over here to get to the edge. So I'll kind of tweak it, again, using a test piece and finding which spot is going to give me basically where I want that screw to come out, and it has enough material to hold on to, and I don't have to worry about it breaking out. This is about a 1/16 of an inch bigger than this actual shelf, so it actually works out pretty well. But otherwise, I've got it all laid out. Everything's all sanded. These are my other pieces over here ready to go as well. Now I'm going to take some clamps and I'm going to get everything basically fit up together and then put those screws through. But first, I'm going to go ahead and run these Kreg holes through each of the shelves. Again, I'm going from the underside of each shelf because that's how I've decided I can hide it the best. I couldn't come up with a way that I felt was going to work here, because if you try to come up through this, it's going to want to put the screws to a point where that shelf doesn't actually exist. I'm also going to use some glue in there as well, but little glue, because I don't want any type of squeeze out to come out around any of these connection points, because it's really tough to sand. Certainly you can get to it, but it's not ideal to have to sand that back. So I'm going to make sure I use glue exactly where it needs to be, and then get those screws and the clamps to hold everything together while it dries. I have not actually blown any of this stuff off from the sanding. It is still got some of that powder, but for this part, I'm not too worried about that. Once I get it together, I'm gonna resand it some more anyways, because I did not sand any of the ends. That's the bottom, but I did not sand the edge of the shelves, front or back, end to end. I'm gonna do all that once I've got it back together, so I'm gonna have to blow it off again anyways, and then I'll be able to clear it from there with some polyurethane. So right now, I'm gonna go ahead and drill these pocket holes. All right, so again, I've preset this up. I've determined that the 3/4 inch setting here, and then actually a half spot, which is what I typically do with a lot of projects, but I'm basically at about maybe an inch, maybe halfway between an inch and 1.25 inches there, because it doesn't really have a gauge. It goes from 3/4 to 1.5 inch there, but that tends to work a little better for some of the projects I'm doing. Test it out with a test piece. It needs to be the same thickness as the project that you're working on, or at least accounting for where the screws are going to come out on the other side of that. So you make sure that it's not going to poke out of the wrong spot or poke through on the outside. Certainly that would be a problem if it was going to poke through once it comes through this spot. Taking the clamp that it comes with, lining it up on the project, using the bigger flat side on the wood itself so I'm not getting any damage from pressing it there. And then basically just taking this and making the holes. All right, there we go. First 2 pockets. I'm gonna go ahead and put these on all of the 4 spots on each shelf, and then gonna be ready to put everything together. All right, and that first board's done. As I mentioned, I'm gonna be continuing to use this yoga mat as I'm going, since I've already basically sanded this down. Again, I'm gonna do a final sand on everything, but that just helps so I'm not banging anything around. Nice soft surface to keep putting everything back down on. So again, get a used yoga mat, Goodwill, couple bucks. Make sure you account for which side you want to be facing up or down before you drill those holes. All right, so I've got a square here. I've got my glue, mustard bottle, and then otherwise I'm gonna put some glue in here, and then I'm gonna start putting these together. So clearly I gotta take these 2 back out, but I'm gonna put a little bit of glue in there, do the same with getting the end caps on here, and then I'm gonna put the screws through once I'm sure I've got it to square. Again, using this, I'm gonna use some clamps to hold everything there. On a couple of these spots, the space for the cut in, the groove of the shelf itself, looks like it went a little wide. I've cut off some end pieces that came from up here when I took this piece off that I'm gonna use to patch into there, but I'm gonna do that afterwards if I need to trim that down anymore or whatnot. But then I'll be able to cut that out with like a coping saw or something like that, but something to get real close there and make it basically disappear. Make sure you're accounting for your holes facing down, because we're trying to hide those. If you're doing pocket holes on any type of project, you want to try and hide those, unless it's part of the look, which I'm not sure why that would be part of your look, but maybe that's something you're going for. And if you pre-labeled a shelf to be a certain one, make sure you're accounting for that as well, because again, I chose my bottom, middle, and top, specifically the top because it had a special grain look and stuff that I liked. So I want to make sure that those get exactly where I want them. Again, just a little bit of glue. Nothing that's going to get a ton of squeeze out is what I'm trying to do here. With the use of the clamps and a square, I'm gonna make sure that I get this thing locked in to a square. Because even though you built a square, it's pretty easy to get something to wobble one way or the other. And something that would have worked really well on something like this is corner clamps, which I don't have. And I am sticking to a thing where I'm not buying any new tools. I'm gonna make everything I got work until I'm somehow generating some money enough to start buying more tools. But whatever I got, that's what's gonna work. So again, you don't always have to buy a new tool, you use what you got. So on to putting some screws in here now. I am going to use an additional clamp on each place that as I'm putting the screws in, just to make sure that those joints are tight. Just check and square again, which we are good. And I definitely have some glue dripping through, which is already setting up where it had started running, so I don't think I'm gonna have any issues with it actually dripping down onto the project. But again, you can sand it back, just not ideal. And it does not look like I had any glue come through the joints. The only place that I'm seeing the glue come through is on those pocket holes that I had made because of the angle I had those boards sitting while I was gluing them up. So now I just need to get to that bottom shelf, which I will see if I can just lay it down. It's actually gotten a little heavy, but that's due to the clamps. Whew. All right, so I'm gonna overhang this so that I can get a clamp from end to end, like so. Double check square again. All right, I actually forgot the screws in that corner. All right, so definitely still have some work to do as far as sanding. I'm gonna be sanding down these sides and making sure everything's flush. Just very marginal overhang in a couple spots. I'll be getting that with the sander to line that all up. If you can see, there are some spots where there's a bit of a gap, which I do plan to fill in with some of these pieces that I've cut down, which will be used to slip into these sections. So everything's all dry. I've got it currently tipped up on one side. So I've got these little slivers that I had cut off of the end of one of the legs. I'm going to use one of these to glue in here. This is by far the worst one. And these are some of those things that everybody's experienced. When you're making something, you see the imperfections. Somebody else is probably not going to see it. Maybe we would see it in each other's work. A normal person who's not doing this type of craft is probably not going to notice. We still want to get it as close to perfect, at least I do. I'm going to go around and patch each one of these as best I can. You can certainly use regular wood glue, which I've got Titebond 3 in this. It's what I used on the rest of the glue up. But I'm gonna go ahead and use some CA glue just because I have got a longer applicator here that I could really get into that groove there, and I don't have to worry about getting a lot of spill out or anything like that. So I'm probably gonna put it on the edge and down in the inside there and just put it in there. I've got a big enough gap. Again, I'm not sure what happened here, how it cut out that much. Either way, I've got to patch it, and then I've got a couple edge pieces that we will look at next. So we're just gonna hold that in place for 30 seconds or so to let that all cure up. I didn't do the spray, the quick dry applicator that you can put on there. This will dry up pretty quick, and then we'll let it really cure before we start cutting at it, in which I'm just gonna cut alongside here, trim up there, and then I'll do some hand sanding to get it to blend in. So not a big deal. Another thing you can do is you can take some sawdust and fill in some of these smaller gaps with some glue and such. CA glue, you could use it, kind of turns into an epoxy look to it. That way it'll actually turn in nicely when you apply that polyurethane. It won't look all funky like wood glue will, where that kind of pops. You can tell if wood glue's there versus this will kind of blend in. So, but we'll get to that when we go to finishing it, and otherwise I'll just see which other sections I can kind of fit some bigger pieces into. You know, sometimes with projects, mistakes happen. It's not a big deal. We can patch it up. Showing some of that behind the scenes stuff that maybe a lot of channels kind of skip right past and act like everything went together perfect. That's not usually the case, actually. Usually something can go wrong and you got to address it, and that's okay. It's part of the craft, part of the fun of figuring it out, I think. And honestly, when it still turns out looking fantastic, one of the reasons it's quite enjoyable to see that result. All right, so everything's put together. It's nice and strong with the glue and with the pocket holes. Everything looks really good, really square. Now I just gotta cut out these extra pieces. I'm gonna attempt to do it with a razor blade since it's some smaller stuff there. You could certainly use like a small coping saw or something like that. Whatever will get into that space, and then we'll sand to finish it. I gotta sand all of the edges here, definitely all of the edges up on the top, bring those down level because they're actually about a 1/16 of an inch up. Cut them with a bit of excess just to make sure I had enough to sand into place and make them line up, and then that's it. So this is one of those spots that I did fill in with the gap. It was only half of this on the way in. I've already cut it with a razor and just showing how easy that's gonna come off. Nothing special there. And I'll clean that up with sanding, just some hand sanding. And I'm gonna do that on each little piece that I've filled in just to get those all cleaned up and square with the rest of it. And then do some little hand sanding, and then I'll do major sanding on the rest of it. So here's that final product. It turned out really well. Again, this started as pallet wood and now it's a luxury piece of furniture that's gonna live in our house. Everything turned out really square. The finish turned out really nice, really great grains and characters throughout it. I've got it all sanded down to 220, which is, I think, a pretty nice finish. I know some of you guys might have taken it even further, but I typically am okay with that one. I think the grain pops really well. And again, I'm gonna be spraying this with polyurethane to get a nice clean finish there. But unfortunately, I'm not gonna be doing that yet as it's been raining a bunch in my area. So for me to be able to spray it, I have to move a bunch of stuff out of my garage. And I can't since it'd be sitting in the rain. So I gotta wait until it kind of lets up on that before I'm gonna be able to spray it. Again, for something like this coming from pallet wood, pretty fantastic. If you can see some of the darker spots here, light, you guys saw that grain going throughout. And again, a lot of pocketing and stuff that I think is really cool. So this is gonna live in a hallway spot that we have under this window. It's gonna look really nice there. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching my video. If you guys like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe and check out my affiliate links for any of the tools I've used. All of those links do give me a little bit of a kick and certainly helps build the channel and provide more projects to come. If you guys would like to see me do anything in the future, any project ideas, leave those in the comments as well, and I'll definitely get you to the top of the list. Otherwise, guys, keep making sawdust, and I'll see you on the next video.